Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce, the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight is going to be Marie D. Jones, and we're going to be talking about her latest book, Destiny versus Choice. And she's covering a lot of the big questions of life in this here, like does fate determine our lives, or do our choices make our all the difference? And it's a pretty in-depth book. I got the pleasure of reading this here book, and I can't say it definitively answers anything so much as it does bring a lot of interesting questions to the table. But then, too, I don't think this subject has a black and white answer to it to begin with. And I think Marie, unless I misread the book, came to the same pretty much conclusion overall. Marie, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. Good to talk to you again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Marie. You got such interesting thoughts, and I think you and me share a lot of interests, like Hermetic traditions and alchemy and quantum physics and stuff like that. So it kind of, I think, just makes us feel natural around each other.
Absolutely.
So, at any rate, was I pretty correct in my assessment about the not being any real, definitive black and white answers about the destiny versus choice question, but a lot of interesting questions?
Yeah, all it does is bring up more confusing questions, which is why this debate has been going on for thousands of years. There's no answer. One big part of the equation is missing, and that's what's called first cause, and that is trying to determine the motivation or agenda for whatever created us. If there was a motivation, if there was an agenda, then that would speak to destiny. That would speak to the idea of purpose, of predeterminism, even fate to a certain degree, although fate is pretty extreme. But without really knowing whether there was some kind of God or intelligent design and what its motivation might have been, we cannot answer this question completely. So a lot of it just comes down to faith.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that and there. And, even with faith or without faith, either one, that very first question is that chicken or egg, or, what was the cause or the effect. I don't think anybody's ever been able to really have a definitive, provable outcome on that one, in other words.
Absolutely. And, every religion has tried to tackle this. Every philosopher has tried to tackle it. And it always keeps going back to the same thing. If we live in a cause and effect world, we cannot, we have to know that first cause.
Yeah, we couldn't be here if something didn't cause us, but then again, what caused the first cause?
Yeah, oh boy. Now see, you're doing the thing about when you try to contemplate infinity.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay, if the universe doesn't, let's say the universe has an end. Well, what's after that? It'll make you nuts. And I honestly, when I was doing the research for this book, I had to stop at some point reading about the philosophy aspects of it, because these people were making me crazy. They just were trying to nitpick every aspect of this debate to try to answer the questions you and I are talking about right now, with the realization the whole time that they could, without knowing first cause. And I had never heard the term first cause before, but I kind of knew what I was getting into. I figured we're not going to really know, what the meaning of life is until we know what happened at the Big Bang and what happened before it, and who made it, who triggered it, and did they have something in mind when they did so? Was it random? Was it chaotic? Was it meaningless? Without knowing all of those things, the whole destiny versus choice journey is really taking a step in faith that whatever answers you are going to find are going to actually just really come from your individual experience, maybe. I think that's what it all boils down to in the end anyway.
Yeah, I was just thinking while I was listening to you that at some point in time, even in an unbeliever's life, faith ends up being the thing that's relied on in the end anyway, depending on the circumstances.
Right. The interesting thing, though, is I always thought fate and destiny were the same thing. And they're really not. Fate is really an extremist version of destiny. Fate is the belief that everything about your life is preset, predetermined, laid down in stone, and you're powerless, which is why in the great mythology stories you've got the three fates and the three goddesses that would dole out the fate of each human, and you were stuck with that. You had no maneuvering room. You could not make choices. Destiny is a little bit milder, a little more malleable, a little more fluid. You have a blueprint. You have a plan, but you have an awful lot of maneuvering room within that blueprint or that plan.
Kind of like
people. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize for that, but I was just going to say.
Oh, no, don't worry.
Kind of like an end goal, but many different ways you could choose to arrive at that end goal.
Absolutely, absolutely. I always say if you want to go to Hawaii, that's your destination. Okay, that's your destiny. But there's a million ways you can get there. There are a million people you can go with. You could decide not to go. So you have a lot of choices to how you're going to get there, but the ultimate destination remains the same.
Well, actually, when you think about it, and this is a little bit on the morbid side, but death is kind of like the same way. We're all going to get there in the end. However,
right.
We all got our many different ways of arriving.
Oh, that is kind of sick to think about, but well, yeah, and I think most of us, you and me included, believe that we don't just fade to black and that's it. That we do continue on. And of course, the great religions all believe in some aspect of reincarnation or the karmic wheel. So yeah, we're all going to die, but we may not necessarily all go to the same place afterwards or continue along the karmic wheel in the same sense. And yeah, you're right. We're all going to die differently. We're going to die at different times. I think what's interesting to ask is, people that die really young or they die very tragically or violently, was that destined? Was that part of their destiny to do that?
And then another question would be, what would be part of their destiny, and who would determine such a thing as that?
Right. So we judge it as being bad or evil or tragic, but what if that was exactly how they were meant to die in order to carry out their own destiny and possibly even have an effect on the people around them, teach them lessons, help them break through or overcome challenges. So it really does get very philosophical when you think about destiny in terms of death, how people die. Some children that die, we think, oh my God, this is awful, this is so tragic. And yet, how do we not know that first cause set it up for that child to die that way for a reason? And again, it goes back to first cause.
Which, of course, you got to question that even more so in the cases of children that don't even make it out the birth canal. I mean, they're never even given a chance in this here world, and that to me is even more of this here why. I mean, even a baby, you at least got to experience. In other words.
Well, but you know what? Again, if we're going to take this one step further, we don't know if, again, the soul of that child chose to have that experience of not being born in order for the parents to learn specific lessons. And this goes to the belief in things like soul codes and soul contracts and soulmates, that before we come into this incarnation, we've made deals with certain other souls. You're going to teach me this. I'm going to drive you crazy and push these buttons so that you learn this, and that we've all made this agreement that we're going to choose who our parents are. We're going to choose, our siblings, our spouses, what have you. We don't see all that stuff because it operates on that implicit, invisible level before we come here.
Right.
All we see are the effects. Again, we're not seeing the first cause. We're seeing the effects. So then we come here and we have all kinds of awful, tragic things happen, and it ends up being for a reason. I think a lot of people, too, when they get to a later point in their life and they can look back, they say, oh, wow, now I see that I really needed to go through that awful experience, even though at the time I felt like I was going to die. Now I see why it needed to happen and what I learned from it.
I would tend to agree with you. I don't know about this soul contract. I mean, I've talked to guests about it before. I am familiar with it. But again, it's another thing, like you said, I think in my opinion, it's done on faith. You have to have a faith to believe that you made this contract before you incarnated, in other words. And it's not to say it didn't happen, just in a way to really know concretely, in other words.
Exactly.
Now, I am with you. I do believe that we do live on. I mean, even science teaches us that we're that the main part of us that keeps us alive is energy, and energy can be neither created nor destroyed, which if it cannot be destroyed, we have to continue on in one form or another, someplace or the other.
It's as simple as that. Hey, law of thermodynamics, kids. Energy doesn't change form. It may change the system within it operates, but you're absolutely right. And I think one of the ways that we might get a kind of hopeful glimpse into the fact that we do have destiny, or that we don't just live one meaningless life, is when you see all these near-death experience reports. And you've got thousands upon thousands, maybe even millions of people that die and come back saying, I was told that it was too early for me to die. I was told that I needed to go back and finish this. I was told that I needed to go back and complete this, my purpose. So if we believe those, even though they're subjective experiences that we can't yet prove, but if we believe those reports, it sure does sound like we have a purpose and that we are not going to die until we've fulfilled it. So a child that dies at the age of 3 may have indeed filled that purpose. And their time to go on to the next part of the karmic wheel is due. So it's really...
we have no way to...
A lot of it goes on with no proof.
Well, there's so much...
circumstantial evidence.
So much unknowns out there.
It is, I know. But you know me. I'm trying to figure out the unknowns, even if I don't think I ever will. I
feel bad. I do too. I used to drive my kids crazy because I used to talk to them about the invisible potential world that's out there, that if you don't plan for it, it'll catch you by surprise. And they're like, there's no invisible world.
And now that they're older, they say, oh, okay, yeah. And hey, look, science is backing us up. We got the 0-point field, It's just that implicate order. I actually think children are really tuned into that order. And it's only when they get older they get knocked out of it into, what we consider to be reality. And, I know the kids that I've been around, they thrive in that invisible order. And then pretty soon we start telling them, straighten up and fly right. Pay attention to what's in front of you. And, oh boy, that's the beginning of the end, huh?
They had a movie out about that once, about these babies that had all this full knowledge of the universe that was erased as they got older. And I forget the name of the movie, but
Oh, wow, yeah. I don't think I've ever seen that, but that sounds great. And seems to be what happens. You've got kids that are born speaking languages, and they have knowledge of other civilizations, other cultures that they couldn't possibly know.
Yeah, you see documentaries about this sort of thing on TV from time to time. It's fairly regular. People that are great musicians at age 3 or even younger than that know Mozart or something of that nature.
Right.
And it had to come from somewhere. You know what I'm saying? How does a baby just have this, or somebody so young just have all this here knowledge suddenly?
Exactly. And what do? We call them freaks. Oh my gosh. But it's true. I think, I remember reading once that children operate in alpha. I think it's alpha waves until about the age of 7. And alpha is the brain wave that, of course, is responsible for things like meditation. It's a slightly altered state of consciousness. You're operating with a lot more clear awareness. And I always thought that was really fascinating, because if that's true, then those first few years of a child's life, they're operating in a different brainwave than adults are. And here we are looking at them as being foolish children, or, that child's so odd because he, at the age of 3, can play Chopin on the piano, and yet that's part of their brain structure that just may be much more effective for them. And then as they get older, they end up, brainwaves change. And I think children have a lot of answers, but we really don't pay much attention to them, do we?
Yeah, I think that's largely true. I've gotten a lot of answers from my kids over the years. Most of my kids my youngest right now is 17 years old. So they're almost all out, grown by now. But,
Right.
I'm at that age now that I can look back and say, well, look what I learned from them. And I noticed that, what was you going to say? I'm sorry.
Well, they do teach us, don't they? We don't like to admit that, but...
Oh, I don't mind admitting it, but I know a lot of people don't because they're like, well, we're the grown-ups. We're supposed to be the ones who know.
Exactly, yeah. We can't admit that our kids know more than we do. Come on. Oh, that's funny.
But children, they do definitely have their moments, and they can really, cause you to stand up and take notice.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I used to have this rule that to keep my kids from arguing with me, I took this up from my sister. Rule number 1, Daddy's always right. Rule number 2, if Daddy's wrong, see rule number 1.
I like that.
And
I'm not going to do that, but put Mommy instead.
Well, actually, my sister had it with Mommy. I changed it to Daddy. But
that's classic.
I did
like that.
I did something really dumb one day, and I went, stupid Roy, stupid Roy, stupid Roy. And my son John was in the kitchen, about 6 years old, says, well, Dad, I'd like to argue with you about that, but I'm remembering rules number 1 and 2.
Exactly. And how many times did our parents do that to us, right? When we were trying to express ourselves. So it is that karmic wheel that's ever turning.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of times also the environment may suppress any talents or any connections that we have as kids. If our parents ain't doing it, the church is, or the teachers are, or even your fellow classmates to some degree. If you exhibit anything out of the ordinary, the kids on the playground will call you a freak.
Absolutely. Peer pressure, societal pressure, familial pressure. Later on, you get married and your spouse pressures you to change and be a certain way. We are doomed from the beginning to not be authentic. And I think destiny has a lot to do with, if you find your destiny, you really are just finding your authenticity, who you really were meant to be.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I think you said earlier, I think there is a large place where destiny plays a choice and where fate plays a choice. I think a lot of times it's like groundwork that's laid out. You got cause and effect. That can, to me, lead into fate. I mean, if you do this, the end fate of that is going to be this.
Exactly, right.
The karma, cause and effect, that whole thing would operate seemingly under that system. But on other hands, you could choose to go to the corner, to a store or a school 5 or 10 different ways as long as you get to your destination.
Right, exactly. And I think that had we not been given any free choice at all, what would be the point of life? We would be powerless. We would be slaves. We would be zombies, basically. And I don't really understand. To me, it has to make sense. Something always has to make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me that whatever created us would throw us here for nothing. I really feel like it makes more sense to believe that we come here to evolve and to evolve continuously. And we may have a destiny. We may have a destiny in this life. We may also have an ongoing evolutionary destiny that it's going to take 1 million lives to finally get to the end point of. But that makes more sense to me than something creating life in all of its complexity and sophistication for no reason. It just doesn't make sense to me. I can't prove it.
Well, there you are. I created you.
Yeah, I know. That's
I'm gone. I'm on the next one.
The wall some more.
But yeah, I can see what you're talking about, and in the same token, on the opposite side of the coin, that structure, you got to have that. I mean, it's within the boundaries of destiny and fate. I think is where we get to evolve at. In other words, I mean, too much structure, we have no choice. We go one way. There's no evolving. Too much free will, we have nothing to guide us. We're not evolving. If you put us right in the middle path of both of them in the right ways, then we have a chance to evolve within the ground rules, is what it seems like.
Exactly. And that's exactly where the truth seems to be, right there in that middle road, where you're given a foundation, you're given a structure. Even the universe has a structure, has a blueprint, it has laws, even though those laws may get overturned occasionally. There are laws that operate, laws of motion, gravitation, thermodynamics, whatever. But we are still able to operate with some choice within the framework of those laws. And the same thing applies on a human individual level with genetics, with DNA. We come into this life with a physicality that has been predestined by our parents and their parents and their parents and all the way back to first cause again. It will determine our eye color, our body build, how tall we are, bone structure, etc. Even to a point, some of our behaviors and what diseases we may end up with. And yet, when it comes to personality and behavior, we sure have an awful lot of choice there. We have an awful lot of choice as to how we're going to develop certain gifts that we've been given or talents that we were born with, or not develop them. So it's that middle road where everything seems to kind of balance out. And yet, some people, like me, really have a good sense of destiny. And I've always had a sense of destiny ever since I was a child. I like to say I'm one of the lucky ones, but I don't think it's luck. I think I just was one of those kids that always knew I was destined to be a writer. I was destined to express myself with a written word. That doesn't mean that I have a destiny and the guy next to me doesn't, because he didn't know what he wanted to be ever since he was a kid. It just means that for some reason I stumbled upon my path with an awful lot of clarity as a child. And other people do it later. Some people never do it.
And I think a lot of people, they never find their destiny due to the environmental teachings that surround them as they're growing up as well.
Right, exactly. Some of it is their fault because they just, they're not taking responsibility for the life that they're living. But you're right, a lot of it is environmental, again, all of the exterior influences of society, of siblings and parents and the family unit, of school, of peers, colleagues at work, religious beliefs, philosophical and cultural beliefs. I mean, we are hammered with other people's ideas of how we should live our lives. No wonder we're screwed up and don't know what to do.
It's a wonder we have any of our own.
Well, that's right. See, people have to listen to radio shows like this and read books like mine to figure out. But it is tough, and I'm not saying I have it all down pat either, because a lot of times I'm confused and I'm not sure if something that I'm doing is a part of the destiny that I feel like I'm being drawn towards. And that's when choice really comes into play, because I think that people make choices. They know inside, deep, intuitively, instinctually, if they're making a lousy choice, and they know if they're making a good choice. I think a lot of it comes down to how you feel. Is this propelling you towards something that excites you, that makes you feel good, like you're being authentic? Is it something that makes you miserable, makes your stomach hurt, you break out in a cold sweat? Right there, you can determine by the feelings that your choices bring you whether or not you're on your path to destiny or you've been knocked way off.
Yeah, I think I'd tend to agree with you. Also, the same token about what you're talking about, how many people have done something that you'd hear them say later, I knew I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, it's like, why did you do it? But hey, I've done it too. It's like, okay, for example, something really silly. This morning, I dropped my son off from school, and I got this weird feeling not to go down the road that I usually take to get home. I just, I don't know why. There was nothing up ahead that I could see. I just got this weird feeling. But like an idiot, I did it anyway. There was, just around the corner, a massive, massive accident and backup. And I sat there for like half an hour going, why didn't I listen to that voice and just make a U-turn and go the other? What is wrong with me? So we do that with little things in life. And big deal, I lost a half hour this morning. But it's when we do it with bigger things in life that we really get in trouble. When we marry the wrong person, even though our gut tells us, don't marry that person. When we pursue a vocation and it's really what our parents wanted for us, not what we want.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that goes down.
Yeah. Really. And then we wonder why we're so miserable, why we get so many autoimmune diseases, which I believe are directly tied to the stress of not living authentically. We wonder why opportunities pass us by, but somebody else gets them. We look at other people who are happy and say, why can't I be happy? And then we, because we don't realize that we made all those stupid choices that we knew we shouldn't make.
Which I have to admit, I made several of those myself.
I did too.
I want to remind everybody, though, that they can go to your website, www.mariedjones.com, and she has a whole list of all of her books over there, and all these articles that she's worked on, and her and Larry have worked on, and she's also co-founder of ParaExplorers.com with Larry Flaxman, and together they delve deeply into paranormal at the well, they're trying to help make science meet spirituality, as I understand it. Is that right, Marie?
Absolutely. Two ends of the same yardstick. I always say that. We've got to meet in the middle somewhere, and I really think that's where the paranormal research has been headed, to that middle ground.
Yeah, I think so, too. And I think it was really those two were joined together in the middle at one point back there some thousands of years ago before it got separated.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. So, yeah, we're not trying to discover new knowledge so much as uncover the knowledge that we forgot, that we used to have before technology, progress, all those kinds of wonderful things came along, and even belief to an extent. I mean, I think, certain religious traditions have pushed us off the path of inner knowledge by telling us that you can't possibly know the truth. You need an intermediary to know the truth. You need a middleman.
The one thing I keep getting back time and time again from this here book, Destiny versus Choice, though, is again, everything really goes back to the individual and them listening to their inner voice, their gut instinct, right. I think Apostle James called it the quiet man, or the quiet inner man.
Yeah, exactly. The word quiet, who knows what that means anymore, huh? The world of distraction. And, yeah, it's amazing how many people have forgotten they even have that little voice in there. It's funny because they'll look for guidance outside of themselves.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at right there, looking for guidance outside instead of inside. And if you're in a world full of people that's all going in the wrong direction, if you follow any one of them, you're going to go in the wrong direction. And some of these people may have different destinations.
Right?
They may have different destinations.
Right. Follow those lemmings right off that cliff. Go ahead. Yeah, I agree. And I'm not saying you shouldn't read books and go to lectures and things like that. Exterior guidance and influence can be amazingly beneficial, but ultimately, I think people need to tune in and figure out, hey, does this resonate with me? Do I buy into this? Do I really, truly, deep inside, subconsciously even align myself with this, or is this somebody else's idea of what truth is?
Does this make sense would be another question you could ask.
Oh, yes. I love that one. Does it make sense?
But, yeah, I mean, I personally, I agree with you. I believe in reading everything that comes along almost and evaluating for myself what I think is good and what's bad, and letting life teach me as I go along, where I made the errors at, and correct them as I go.
Right, correct your course. Your course can still lead you to the same destination, but you're constantly correcting the course so that your travel might be a little bit smoother. Maybe it won't take so long, might not run into as many obstacles that way. You'll still run into the ones that you are destined to learn from and overcome, but you could probably avoid a lot of ones that just came out of bad choices, if you paid attention to that inner guidance a little bit more. Excuse me.
Well, part of what you did is you talked about destiny versus choice in science and also in religion, which is very interesting. One of the things that I was going to ask you, though, it wasn't in your book, is do you think people maybe have some part inside of them that draws them to a certain religion from early on, maybe from a past life experience or something that could kind of destine them or predispose them to following one religion over another?
I think so. Yeah, I think some of it might be, leftover emotion and experience from a previous incarnation maybe, or something that hasn't been dealt with, or maybe you're just recognizing kindred spirits when you come into this life. And that could be why religion is so popular, because we're looking for people who feel the same way we do. That's our tribe, so to speak. But I do think that a lot of people get involved in religion to cop out on life, to not take responsibility, to not lead, to be followers, to not have to think, They defer their ability to function to someone else, and they do it under the guise of religious belief. And I'm not saying everybody does that, but I think a lot of people do. And I think it's the same with political belief as well. We may gravitate towards certain ways of looking at the world. I know I gravitate differently towards people in my family that I love dearly. But then at the same time, I think there's a lot of people out there that buy into certain political beliefs for reasons that have nothing to do with destiny at all, or even feeling or emotion. I think it's more about wanting to just be led and not have to lead yourself.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I had a long talk with a friend of my wife's named Zoe about this same thing, and about how, that's why some people are employers while other people are employees. Some people are church deacons and pastors while others are the congregation.
Right.
And, everybody, if you follow from one place to the next, they seem to be very content in their role. There's no initiation to move up except for the people who've already moved up.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the issues, is just staying stuck in the role that you've been playing and never, ever stopping to question long enough whether you still buy into that role or believe in it or even need it. You may have already gotten everything you could get out of that role, but because it's comfortable, it's your comfort zone, you don't want to break out of it, so you stay there. And those are the people that never really reach their destiny. They never really experience the fullness of their authenticity because it's so much easier to stay stuck in that comfort zone.
And maybe they're afraid to take a chance of the unknown as well.
Right. You step out of that comfort zone, you could get hit by a bus. It's scary out there, but at the same time, that's where life is. And it's almost like if you don't choose to break out of that comfort zone, you're kind of like the Walking Dead. That's the way I like to refer to it, because I see people that are like that. They're going through the motions. They are going through the motions.
I think I've seen people like that too. Now, me personally, I'm the kind of person that I could never trust somebody else's judgment as it relates to my life and my reality.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what I'm afraid of is, well, if I follow you and you mess up, then I'm going to go down with it. No, I want to just take charge of myself. At least that way I make my own mistakes.
There you go. If I'm going to go down, I'm going down for my own stupid choices, not yours. But that's true. At least you feel a sense of freedom. You may still, again, have that destiny. You may still have a path in your life. But you feel empowered by having the freedom to make the mistakes on your own or succeed on your own. I mean, who wants to succeed by latching on to someone else? Because, when all is said and done, that that's not your success. You know that is somebody else's coattails you've been riding on, and that you pretty much help them get to their destiny.
That's like paying somebody your homework for you.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't learn that way. Sure, you might get an A and a little star, but you're not going to learn that way. So, but yet, again, we see how many people that way because it's a lot easier. And there have been times when I've kind of felt like, I'm so tired of trying to do the right thing and make the right choices. I'm just really tired. Can I just follow somebody? Can you just live my life for me? But I know better.
I know that there are people that you can find them online. They're called Gore, that they actually ask people to be their master because they prefer this type of lifestyle. And some of them, I've been told, were like doctors and lawyers and people in high-stress jobs that, like you say, just wanted to get away from the pressure and be the follower instead of the leader, in other words. So, I guess leading is high stress to a lot of people. In other words, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Come on. I think that's why cults are so popular, and even politics and religion. We know when there is a charismatic leader who can really make you feel secure if you follow them, there are a lot of people that will do so. They'll give in to that seduction of security, I guess you could say, because life is difficult, and it really, really is hard to know the right choices sometimes, and it really can be a struggle to live your dreams and try to express who you are. Some people get killed for doing that in some countries. So if somebody comes along and they can seduce you into following them, and, telling you what your role will be as one of their followers, I can see that being very attractive to a lot of people.
I think I would tend to agree with you. It would be, some people, I think it again depends on a person's personality largely. I think some people are more extroverted and some are more introverted, and maybe that plays a role.
Right. Yeah, and if you're a really smart leader, you know how to play on the strengths and weaknesses of people, too, to get them to pretty much hand over their destiny to you and follow you and empower your destiny. And I think we see that a lot with people who, some crooked church leaders who have all these followers who literally turn over every dollar they have. And I've seen this happen with a member of my own family, not my immediate family, but, you're giving the church every paycheck, and you're literally giving your life away to the church without ever really questioning whether or not that church leader is on the up and up. What do they need the money for? How easily we will give our fate or the outcome of our lives to someone else just because we've bought into the belief that they are better than us, more important, touched by God, whatever you want to say. That's very scary. I mean, I really think that was the power that Hitler had over the populace. He had the ability, the charismatic ability, to make people feel like, this is my destiny. This is the entire country's destiny, and we saw what happened with that,
Jim Jones would be another, I think.
I think he's even a better example, too, because, oh, wow, I mean, it's one thing to go out and murder and slaughter other people. It's another thing entirely, wow, to get them to believe that they should do it to themselves. That is the ultimate act of giving up control and power over your life. Tragic.
And yet, it's happened many, many times over and over again. I mean, David Koresh would be another example of that.
Right.
People will listen to people if they have this charisma. If you're talking about this confidence and their way that they express things and the way they know how to put things that make things very convincing, in other words.
Absolutely. And I mean, the person that is following a cult leader, they've chosen, I mean, we could also say maybe this was destined to happen to them because it's part of their growth, their evolutionary growth. But in a sense, we might also say that they've made that choice to turn their lives over to someone else. And, again, cause and effect. Well, when you turn your life over to someone else, you're now living their destiny. You've lost yours.
Or their destiny becomes your fate.
Right, exactly. Well, I like that. There you go. Yeah. But again, we have to wonder, though, is everybody that's involved in a situation like that, did they make an agreement beforehand to be involved in that, to try to teach us a lesson that obviously we keep repeating, so history keeps repeating itself. We don't learn our lessons very well, do we? But, yeah, again, without knowing that first cause, we could say, well, somebody who follows a cult and commits suicide, that was their destiny. But we could also say it was their choice. They had nothing to do with destiny.
So then you'd have to apply the same principles to the Inquisition and the Crusades, that they chose their path with their belief in Jesus or their belief in Christ that was different from the church's belief in it, and that turned their destiny or their fate into what they ended up getting, in other words.
Exactly, and that's what becomes very tough for us, is to look at tragic events, even something like the 9/11 terrorist attacks. We can believe that was an awful, awful tragedy, awful choices made by people, but what if it was the collective destiny of humanity to go through an event like that in order for certain things to be learned, for certain things to shift, for entire belief systems to make a huge shift? We just really don't know. And I have to wonder, too, if some people choose to apply meaning to tragedies, because it's easier for us to deal with it. So something awful can happen, and we apply meaning to it. We say, well, it's part of our destiny because it makes us feel better. And maybe it is totally random. But again, what makes sense? What makes more sense? It doesn't make sense to me that randomness exists.
Well, you don't see randomness in creation. I mean, a tree is a tree. It doesn't, yes, you got trees here, grass here, but each one is actually segregated. You could tell it was designed to serve a purpose, and it's put in its exact place to function in an exact way, in other words.
Exactly. And also, if you look at nature, and I think nature is the greatest educator that we have, if you look at the way nature operates, everything is perfect. Everything knows what it is. It knows what to do. It knows how to function. It knows how to exist. The one species that screws up everything is us. We're the only ones that mess with this very sophisticated, preset way of being. A tree knows how to be a tree. It knows how to survive until somebody comes along and cuts it down or burns it down or what have you. I think nature knows how to be nature. We do not really know how to be human beings.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. And, if we really knew that much about what we were doing, it seems like we'd have one set religion for all of humanity instead of all these different ones to choose from where nobody can figure out which one's right if there is a right one.
Absolutely. And that shows you how much, nature versus nurture, definitely the way that we're raised, our parents, again, where we grow up, how society has influenced us. That all has a lot to do with what we end up saying that we believe, what our religious, philosophical, political beliefs are.
Oh, yeah.
But then you have to wonder how much of that might be inherent. And I know that there's been a lot of real current research. Some I was able to get into the book. Some of it happened a little later after the book was already in production. Some neuroscientists who had done some brain research into what parts of our behavior might actually be genetic, might actually be inherent, and not something that we can choose or a product of our environment. And it was surprising because they found that there are things that we are genetically destined towards, such as depression, certain types of violence, schizophrenia, just things like that. And that some people are genetically predisposed to certain types of behavior more so than we've ever known before. So then you have to wonder, okay, are we slaves? Is this just all a product of how the brain acts? But I think most of us know. And again, it comes back to the subjective personal experience. I think most of us know, even if we can't prove it, that our lives are a combination of what we came here with and what we can create while we're here.
Yeah, I've read that the ancients in the old mystery schools knew that a lot of life really dealt with knowing about life, how much of reality is energy and how you can manipulate this energy to turn life into your favor. And I think that has a play on destiny and fate in itself. I mean, it's your thought energy that is where everything starts before it ever manifests into the real world.
Right. And you know what's funny? I had to write about the law of attraction, too, because it's so popular. And it's been around for thousands of years. But, obviously with the book The Secret, it sort of repopularized the idea that we are co-creators of reality, that we are making it up as we go along to some extent. And so people will say, well, how can you have both? And, if we're creating reality with our intention and our thought as we go along, then where does destiny fit into that? And my feeling is that we still have to operate within a structure. We still have to operate within a set reality. I cannot, no matter how badly I intend it, turn myself into a frog. Now, maybe that is possible. We just don't know the mechanisms yet. But, at this point in time, I can create a certain amount of my own personal reality with my thoughts and my very focused intention. But there are other things that I have to operate within a fixed structure of. I'm a human being. I'm not going to change my species. My genetic makeup is going to stay the same. I may color my hair. I may get different color contact lenses, but I'm still going to pretty much be the same physically. So I think the two can go hand in hand. You can have, as I feel I do, a very strong sense of destiny and yet still be able to create much of the path that gets you there.
And actually, I keep saying destiny versus fate, and it's destiny versus choice. So I want to correct myself on that one. I apologize.
That's okay.
But yeah, it's still an interesting concept, and I do. It seems to me, from my living life like I have, that you are probably right on key. Well, at least as far as I can seem to tell. I mean, we do seem to be within a structured environment. We're allowed to, for instance, we're allowed to create in such a way that we can affect our lives, but there's very little we can do to affect other people's realities, in other words.
Right. And in a cosmic sense, we cannot stop the universe from doing what it's going to do. I mean, I can't stop a star from going supernova or anything that goes on out there. But in our individual lives down here on planet Earth, we have an awful lot of power to create the reality that becomes our day-to-day lives. And I think that's really the most important thing anyway. We don't need to change the foundation. We don't need to change the blueprint or the structure. What we need to do is make the best choices to fulfill our destiny and our authenticity within that structure. Not question the structure, just operate the best we can within it. I'm a human being. That's not going to change, not in this lifetime. So how do I become the best human being I can be? I have an awful lot of choices to how I can do that or not do it.
Yeah, and sometimes you think you're making the choices to become a better human being, and you actually end up making ones that turn you into a worse human being.
Yeah, exactly. Then it gets really frustrating. But again, we might need to learn those lessons. Those might be mistakes that we need to make.
Yeah.
Because they're a part of the overall destiny that we might not really be aware of. Again, it's like we have one destiny for this life, but we've got that sort of over-expansive soul destiny, that evolutionary destiny that's going to go on for quite a while before we get to some kind of end point.
Well, I do think that, in my personal opinion, that reincarnation has a stronger possibility of being a actual phenomena than, say, the church's version. I just don't buy that God put everybody here on this planet with all these different religions and says there's one true church. You got to get with that one if you want to make it to heaven, and the other one's going to be going to hell. And in one lifetime, you're going to figure out which one's which with all this confusing input coming in other words.
Exactly. It's, in my Father's house are many mansions. I mean, wow, if that's not the multiverse, I don't know what is. But I think the foundation of all of the great religious traditions understood the metaphysical and spiritual concepts that we today are talking about. But it was all the dogma and doctrine and rules that got piled on afterwards that really started to lead people astray. And, of course, the belief that you needed some kind of middleman through which to align yourself with your Creator, whatever that might be for you. God, source, the force, whatever. But the belief that you need somebody to go through to experience that really was a method of control, a method of domination. And I think a lot of people
because the middleman gets to be the ruler.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, people are waking up and realizing, wait a second, I can get to that divine energy just like anybody else can. I don't need a middleman to do it, especially when I feel like maybe the middleman has not been telling me the truth.
And that's been something I've thought for, I can't tell you how long now, is that, having a church as a go-between, and I'm not trying to down churches. I don't agree with them, but I'm not trying to go out of my way to down them either. But to have them as a middleman between you and God, like they like to put Christ as the middleman in between you and God. Well, it kind of like is putting a bridge between you and God. I mean, where do you get the one-on-one relationship with a middleman in between, keeping you apart? That's kind of like having a wedge.
Exactly. It's really pushing the concept of separation, when I think inside of us we all intuitively know this is about unification, not separation. The idea is to feel at one with the divine, at one with everybody and everything else, not separate from it. Separation is what breeds racism, sexism, bigotry, intolerance, hatred, violence, you name it.
Ultimately, war.
Absolutely. The sense that I'm different from you, and I don't like that. That scares me. So I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to, kill you so that your differences don't affect me anymore. And yet, and that's what some religions push. Others are better. I don't want to bag on all religions either. But it's that idea of separation that is what is causing all of the violence and misery and war, even poverty in this world. If you don't have that sense of separation, how do you look at a child who's starving and not work your ass off to find a way to end that starvation? And again, people could say, well, maybe it's the child's destiny. It very well might be that child's destiny to be starving, but why? I would say probably to teach us compassion. So we're all connected. Our destinies are all intersected, whether we want to face that or not. So that idea that, oh, you're separate from God, you're separate from the priest, you're separate from the Pope, you're separate from, the whatever the clerics are in other religions, you're separate from your neighbor, you're separate from the person down the street who has a different religion. It's really all meant to make people feel afraid. And when you're afraid, you're controlled. You're a lot more easily controlled.
And a lot easier to pit against each other.
Right, absolutely. So that the people who have initiated those beliefs in the first place can gain more power. Because I think a lot of people buy into religions that they don't even really agree with the beliefs, but it's some of the beliefs they may feel at home with, and that's enough for them. Everybody wants to feel needed, taken care of, protected, secure, and I think religion provides that for a lot of people. But again, you give up your ultimate destiny when you give up your power.
And that's the real trick right there. Me personally, I'm not up for giving up my power to nobody other than the Creator himself.
Right.
I just
how much
can't.
Misery have you had in your life when you have given up that power?
Well, I've learned not to trust other people somewhere.
Yeah, there you go. See?
No offense,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean that in a personal way, but I mean, I tend to learn that, hey, if I'm going to suffer something, I really want to do it on my own. It's easier to like other people when I'm not blaming them for my problems.
Yeah. Ooh. But isn't it fun to blame? Let's see. We could blame God, the devil. We could blame Republicans. We could blame Democrats. We could blame our parents, our children, our spouses, society, the schools. Who else? What else could we blame? We are such a blaming species, and that is the ultimate act of giving up your power. It's called victimhood, where you're blaming everybody else for your own crap, your own mess.
And they're
really, society, yeah, and they're blaming you for theirs. So society mirrors back to us, I think, our beliefs. So
I'm
we're
glad
all
you said
blaming
that.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've always told my wife and kids, I said, you can't be the victor and the victim in the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And people who are miserable and unhappy need to realize that life is a mirror for their predominant thoughts and their predominant beliefs. So if your life is full of hate and intolerance and anger and misery, well, look in the mirror, because you're giving that energy out in some way. You're buying into it. You're perpetuating it.
And you should be denouncing it.
Yeah, or at least changing your, shifting your beliefs, shifting what you want to see in the mirror, shifting yourself. I honestly think that the people that we draw into our lives reflect back to us some of the things that we do not like about ourselves.
That's interestingly enough. I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think it's just a means of, getting you to look at yourself. Right.
Which could be something that you planned out with that person ahead of time. The people that drive you the craziest could be your best, greatest soulmates, because they're the ones that are really pushing you to overcome old beliefs, and old programming, so that you can move on and evolve and move toward your destiny. So those may end up being the best people you can possibly have around you at the time.
I think I had to learn that lesson myself over a period of a marriage that didn't go quite right until later on.
Yeah,
me
definitely,
and my wife,
definitely.
to a stormy period before we got to a calm period. And during this here period, I realized that, I was actually learning to control my temper through her pushing my buttons.
Yeah, see, she was your teacher. You might not have thought that at the time, and isn't that funny how we hate these people at the time? It's like, oh, God, I just want to kill this person. And then later on when you look back, you think, wow, that one person that I couldn't stand is the one that helped me break through this particular block or challenge and overcome it. And then you could hate them just a little bit less.
Well, Joe, it's 5 minutes till. I wanted to once again remind everybody that you can purchase her books, all of them, at Amazon. And that you can also go to our website, www.mariejones.com. And real quick, let's let Marie go through all these list of books that she's got, because I would probably miss some reading them where I'm reading them right here and now. You want to tell everybody about some of your other books?
Wow. Well, the last book Larry and I did together was, The Trinity Secret, The Power of Three and the Code of Creation, which was a really interesting book about why the number 3 is so profound to human beings. The next book we have is called This Book is from the Future, and it's all about the current research into time travel and also anomalies of time, because time really is not what we think it is. It's just an absolutely fascinating subject. But, yeah, that's what's coming down the pike. So, but, yeah, on the website there's information about each book, the books I've done alone, the books I've done with Larry.
I know I had a nice long talk with Larry. I was telling you earlier about that time travel and the book.
Yeah,
It hasn't come out yet. But, I mean, it was really fascinating. And I read your book, The Trinity Secret, as well as Destiny versus Choice, and I really enjoyed both of them very thoroughly. And I got to tell you, you've really done a lot of research in this here, and you know a lot of what you're talking about. You've covered a lot of the same ground I've covered over the years, in fact. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of different paths to follow. And I tend to agree with you. Your life's going to be pretty much what you make of it within the framework you have to make ends work. I mean, there's certain things that I think, yes, are etched in stone. There's other things I think has a little bit of playroom, a little gray area.
Absolutely.
I mean, look at gravity. For a long time, they thought that was a force that couldn't be broken till they come up with the law of lift.
And look, we are on the verge of breaching light speed. Oh, I hope so. Because if that happens, that changes everything. But yeah, we're operating, I really believe I've got a destiny, but I've got choices as to how I'm going to get there and if I'm going to get there. And I think that really applies to the human experience.
And we may not get there in this lifetime.
No, maybe not, but I'll get closer if I make the right choices.
I'd say as long as you're striving for perfection and striving for better and striving to learn, then I don't see how you can't be getting closer.
Absolutely. Well, my ultimate destiny is to know the mind of God. So I may have a few lifetimes I need to go through to get to that.
You and me both.
I want to come face to face with that mind and say, what were you thinking?
There you go. Hey, I'd like to be there. But
yep, you can be there with me.
I hope you come back and talk to us when your new book comes out.
I promise to. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sounds like a winner, Marie. Well, it's getting time for me to start getting ready for bed because I got a son to get up in the morning for school. But I want to thank everybody for participating and coming to the show. Even if you did nothing but listen, you were still participating when you listened. Couldn't have a show without the listeners any more than I could without a guest unless I wanted to talk to myself. So, guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And Marie, I'm going to have this here in my archives tomorrow like I usually do, and I'll send you the link to that. And I've been here lately adding them to YouTube as well.
Awesome. Wonderful. It was a great conversation as always.
Thank you, Marie. I enjoyed it myself. I always enjoy talking to you. You're very nice. I really have a lot of appreciation for you.
Oh, thank you. The feeling is mutual.
All righty. You have a good one. I'm going to go ahead and call it a night.
Sounds good. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.